easy to be grumbly and think, well, it doesn't matter. It's just corporate, blah, 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 shareholders. But really challenge yourself to think, what would happen if I didn't do this? Down the line, who are these numbers I'm crunching impacting? What is this PowerPoint deck I'm making going to enable my organization to do? And trace your impact beyond your immediate inbox, and you'll start to feel that energetic shift.
Welcome to the Seismic Shift podcast, brought to you by Loyola University, New Orleans. In this podcast, we explore the seismic shifts that are shaking up our jobs and our lives. And today, I am super excited to introduce to you the dynamic duo of Elizabeth Lotardo and her mom, who I've been knowing for years, Lisa McLeod. Give it up for Elizabeth and Lisa. Welcome.
Thanks for having us, Michelle.
So great to be here.
So listeners, Lisa and I became fast friends years ago when we were running in the same circles, and she had written a book, Selling with Noble Purpose, with her daughter, Elizabeth, and I had heard about her daughter for years. And the beautiful thing is, if you are watching the video today, Elizabeth, the daughter, just published her very first book called Leading Yourself. And that is one of the seismic shifts that we are seeing. And as a matter of fact, for those of you who know, I'm writing a book right now with Marshall Goldsmith on the seismic shift in you. And this is truly a seismic shift that we're seeing in leadership, that you have to start with yourself. So speaking of starting with yourselves, I would love for Elizabeth and then for Lisa to share their stories. Elizabeth, you go ahead.
Well, Michelle, our books have more in common than just being orange. They both start with what matters to the individual person. And that's where my background really comes to the fore. Lisa and I have been consulting together for a number of years, and my sight line, while Lisa does executive coaching, is always to a frontline employee. And what I saw over the last several years was that, especially in a remote environment, growth relies on the individual employee. Hopefully you have a manager that's in your corner. Hopefully you have a great HR team. Hopefully your organization is championing you and pushing you and giving you purpose. But if they're not, and they're not for a lot of people, that's okay. You have the power to bring meaning, joy, and opportunities to yourself, even inside an imperfect position. So that's what I really wanted to drill down into. It's what I've seen in the consulting practice and what I explored even more deeply in Leading Yourself.
Oh my gosh, Elizabeth, that is beautiful. And one of my favorite passages in the book is a page in the introduction. It's called the What If page. And it said, what if you woke up with more energy? What if you had a better relationship with your boss? What if you didn't want to roll your eyes at your inbox or count down until your next vacation? What if you got to bring the most authentic, ambitious, and engaged version of you to work every day? I love that. Like, why not? Why can't we have
what we're
that?
all after? And I'll point out the subtitle of the book is Finding Meaning, Joy, and Opportunities Despite Imperfect Bosses, Lethargic Coworkers, Too Many Deliverables, Annoying Systems, and all these things that take us out of that what-if space.
Love that. Thank you for that intro. Lisa, tell the listeners about you, my friend.
Well, it's interesting that you introduced us in two ways. One, you talked about Selling with Noble Purpose, which has probably been the best-selling book I've ever written. But you also introduced us as mother-daughter, which is in one way makes me very proud. In another way, I'm like, how did I have a full-fledged master degree in org psych daughter? Because I'm so young. But anyhow, that's a separate point. But I think the journey that we have made together is relevant to this conversation. Because I think because we have had this lifelong relationship, we have had deeply personal conversations about what is life? What does it mean? Why are we here? Why do we work? And that's translated into the consulting, the coaching, the books that we write, because at the core, very few of us were raised to be told, you need to be a cog in a corporate machine. Most people that have been well raised come out of their upbringing with some sense that I have some purpose in this world besides just showing up for work and being a cog. Yet the realities of day-to-day work are we need to make a living. Companies need to be profitable if they're going to stay in existence. So when I look back over my own body of work, which as I've gotten older has grown more significant, I look and I see it is the meshing of I want to be part of something bigger than myself and the practical realities of I need to go to work every day in a big company. And so I don't think it's without coincidence that as a mother-daughter pair, we are bringing this to the fore. We also obviously represent two very different generations. And a lot of my executive coaching clients are my age. They're in their late 40s, 50s, even 60s. And they're talking about how do I find a sense of purpose in my work, but also how do I manage these young people that don't just do what they're told like I did when I was young. I was like, hey, boss, what do I do? Just tell me what to do and I'll please you. And so they're asking that core question. And Elizabeth is with her peer group. She's working with these executives, but also with her peer group that say, I can't just be a cog for a corporate giant. I need more. But I still need a paycheck.
Absolutely. Yes, yes, and yes. And I love the fact that you're mother-daughter. And Elizabeth, I've heard about you for years. I have a daughter named Elizabeth, and this resonates with me deeply because she's 20. She's a junior at the University of Georgia, and she was in town this weekend in New Orleans. And I brought her to one of my friends' parties, and she was the best date ever. And everybody wanted to know, what's your major? What do you want to be? What do you want to do? And I was so proud of her that she was really honest and authentic. She said, I have no idea. I'm a communication major. I'm a business minor. I don't know what I want to do. And last summer when she had her first internship, her eyes were this wide, like, whoa, what is happening here? Right. And I keep trying to say, you don't have to know yet. I'm not putting pressure on her. Right. And so that's a whole nother conversation. And what you're saying is so true. We want our kids to have purpose and to have passion and find something that they love. And then the reality, as you wrote, Elizabeth, again, in the beginning of the book, I would love for you to share with our listeners that why you wrote the book, you described it beautifully of sitting with your friends and realizing that half were miserable, but half weren't. And what was the difference between the two sets? Could you share that story?
So many years ago, I was in the same position as your daughter, a communication major who had no idea what they wanted to do with their life. So you can tell her that there is hope for us. What I found when I started my first job outside of college, I worked in an advertising agency. I was so psyched to get this job. I was so happy to have gainful employment and also be in my field. And I saw so many of my friends experiencing that level of bliss too. Before we started our jobs, we were going out into the world with this unparalleled passion that a young person has. And a few months after starting our jobs in the fall, we all got back together and the tone was really different. A lot of us were tired. Work didn't turn out to be all that we thought it would be. For most of us, at least. A few in the group were still holding on to that passion, that purpose, that wide-eyed opportunity. And you have those moments in your life where at the time you feel like it's nothing. And then over your life, you go back and you continue to unpack it more deeply and think about the layers beneath it. What I realized a decade later was that the people who were holding on to happiness, to purpose, to opportunity, didn't have better jobs than the rest of us. They didn't have more skilled leaders. They weren't in industries that were more exciting. They weren't making any more money. The way they approached their work was different. And that eventually became the study of my own career. How do we as an individual contributor, no matter what's going on with our boss, what's going on with the C-suite, what's going on inside of our industry, how do we as an individual approach work in a way that is more fulfilling? And the good news is the power is completely in your hands to do that, even if you're swirling amongst imperfection, which we all are.
So what was the shift? I love that. How did you, so you noticed it right after you started your first jobs. There was a significant difference between those who were miserable and those who were they still had passion. And then you realized that it had to do with power and control, that we can control ourselves. And you talk a lot about mindset. So talk to us about the shift that you experienced and then the mindset.
So the shift in leading yourself is shifting from powerless to powerful. It's moving from what's out of your control, which is a lot, especially in your first job, to what's in your control. And that shift sounds simple, but it's not easy to execute, especially when your boss is in your ear with changing priorities, when your organization is going through a restructuring, when AI is disrupting your role that you just started. So in the book, I talk a lot about the mindsets of leading yourself, how that translates to the behavior, what you're doing every day at your job, and then ultimately how it shows up in your relationships with your boss, your peers, and those colleagues that you eventually get to know more deeply as you go further in your role. But again, this shift from what's outside of my control, what are all these things that are happening, what's on the periphery of my experience, to what do I own, is something that's easy to intellectually understand, but a little bit more challenging to execute consistently.
Yes. Okay. So what can our listeners do if they're listening right now saying, "Oh my gosh, Elizabeth is speaking to me. That is me. I don't have any control. Everybody else controls my calendar, the meetings, my deliverables, the systems, all the things that frustrate me every single day. So what can I do?"
The first step to being able to lead yourself is to find purpose in your role. This is where leading yourself becomes the spiritual cousin to selling with noble purpose and to leading with noble purpose. Without that feeling of meaning and impact, you're not going to have the energy you need to drive change, and you're not going to really enjoy showing up to work every day, whether that's on your laptop at your kitchen table or back to a corporate office. And oftentimes, and you've explored this topic as well, Michelle, we think purpose is this grandiose thing, like we have to be curing cancer or in the Peace Corps or become a teacher or nurse, something that society deems as really noble and purposeful. But my suggestion in leading yourself, and what Lisa and I have seen play out in our consulting practice, is that purpose is at the core of almost every single corporate job. You just have to look a little bit. So what I would challenge you to do, if this message is landing with you and you think, I'm not in control of so much, but I want to feel better at work, find meaning in your role by exploring the ripple effect. What are all those things you do on a daily basis? Why do they matter? Who are they impacting? And it's easy to be grumbly and think, well, it doesn't matter. It's just corporate, blah, 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 shareholders. But really challenge yourself to think, what would happen if I didn't do this? Down the line, who are these numbers I'm crunching impacting? What is this PowerPoint deck I'm making going to enable my organization to do? And trace your impact beyond your immediate inbox, and you'll start to feel that energetic shift.
Oh, I love it. And I feel like you've just given me a shift, because so much like your mom, so much of what I do is executive coaching. And I'm reminding my leaders all the time, start with the why. Make sure when you begin every meeting, why the meeting? Why does the marketing team do what they do? What's your vision? What are your values? And keep reminding them, right? And that, I think, if you can show up and say, this is why we're here today. This is the why behind this project. This is why you're important. Then, so in other words, I put that onus on the leaders that I coach. And I love how the shift is, you're saying, you know what? If each individual, no matter their title, their role in the company, puts the onus on themselves, saying, I need to find my purpose. I need to find what excites me and what motivates me and gets me up in the morning. I love that. Then there's a lot less pressure on the leader.
Right. And I know Lisa has seen this play out, Lisa, with your executive coaching clients as well, this desire from the employee base to feel a sense of purpose, and a leader's looking around like, okay, yes, but also we have numbers to hit. How do we make those come together?
And that's what Lisa said in the very beginning, how nice it is that she's been able to work with a totally different generation, and a different mindset with you, Elizabeth. So again, speak to our listeners. I'm so fortunate. 150,000 listeners tuned in. And so we have a large audience. So speak to them. So assume that a lot of my listeners are the leaders with the titles and organizations. What can they do to connect with the younger generation to give them that noble purpose?
So one of the best compliments that a leader paid Elizabeth's book was, "This is the book your boss wants you to read." Because, and I want to speak to the leader, but I also want to say, Elizabeth talked about the aspiration, the finding meaning in the job. In the book, she also has how to work for a micromanager, how to work for a boss that constantly changes their mind, and all the annoying things that we deal with. But the thing that the boss needs to know is you don't have to be perfect. You can be a micromanager. You can be a boss who changes your mind. You can be an imperfect boss. And we can think of hundreds of examples of people who have gone to the mat for an imperfect boss, like Steve Jobs, like others. And it's because they tolerated all those behaviors because the boss showed the work has purpose. So if you're a boss right now and you're thinking their paycheck is their purpose, that's not enough. That is not enough. The numbers matter, the paycheck matters. But if you can frame, and there's a technique in the book about framing the work, if you can frame the work that we do, if we're an accounting firm, maybe we help our customers sleep at night. Our clients can sleep at night because they're not worried about being behind on their taxes. If we are a tech firm, maybe we're helping people do things faster. If you can, in one sentence, just frame the work that the employees are doing in the service of something beyond corporate profits. The profits matter, but how are you impacting real human beings' lives? If you can do that, you don't have to be a perfect boss. I mean, I hope you're not shouting at your employees. I hope you're not a total jerk. But if you can do that, because the thing that's so important to understand, so Elizabeth captured this so well in the book of what the employee can do. But the thing to understand is the need for purpose and meaning transcends generations. It goes back to the writing of Aristotle. It goes back to the dawn of time, man's search for meaning. And a lot of people my age took money as a poor substitution. And we thought money and title, that'll give it to me. The younger generation is the same as we are. They simply are putting this to the fore and being more vocal about it. So it's a place that you can connect around, why does this work matter? And you don't have to be curing the cancer. You can be an IT company that simply helps people sleep better at night because all their data is in order.
You are so right. I work with this technology company. It's a DevOps company, and they do a lot of work with Salesforce, and they just finally figured out their messaging, and it's brilliant. They wrote a children's book about it. The company's name is Capado, and they were able to bring to life their big purpose is, we will help you make it home to eat dinner with your family.
That's it.
And all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, my marketing position, my accounting position, my coding position. We're trying to get anybody, any of these, what is it called? The DevOps, the coders. We're going to make processes easier for them so that they can make it home to eat dinner with their family. The clarity in that is so beautiful. And then they did it with the children's book. You're right. It goes back. And I love how you mentioned too, Lisa, Steve Jobs. I was working with Qualcomm during the pandemic, and I would fly out to San Diego, their headquarters, in between the strains of the pandemic, because they had done all this major hiring all across the globe. And they hired me to build a culture of connection so that they could drive amazing results. Right. And one of the things that, and I kept talking about, we've got to create psychological safety. We have to get to know each other's stories. We need trust. We need connection. And that's why we physically brought them together face to face in order to go really fast, because they wanted to go fast. And I would have people come up to me on breaks and they would say, gosh, Michelle, you're really helping us to learn how not to be jerk bosses. Well, then why was Apple so successful with Steve Jobs? Lisa, I can't tell you how many people asked me that. And I said, that's a really good question. And I wasn't there, but he obviously did an incredible job of motivating, right? Mm-hmm. What I'm here telling you is that the conditions are different today. And as Elizabeth said, and the younger generation needs more, they're really not going to tolerate jerk bosses. They're not. So I do a lot about no more jerk bosses. So Elizabeth, talk to us about if there are people listening today and they're like, oh, I've got a jerk boss. What in the world do I do? Do I quit? What do I do? What advice do you have for them?
You're not alone. And there's a huge spectrum of bosses that are amazing to imperfect and well-intended, but not the best, which is where most bosses fall, to complete jerk. No one should be working for a complete jerk. But if your boss has good intentions and maybe has some annoying micromanager tendencies, maybe they change their mind a little too frequently, maybe they're hard to get a hold of, those things are workable. And you don't have to be the boss to change your boss's behavior. You can change it from whatever seat you're in. The challenge is you got to finesse a little bit. So if you're working for a micromanager, you want to suggest a standing meeting every day. So that manager has a place to land. They're not interrupting you because they know they're talking to you soon. If you're working for a boss who always changes their mind, you want to pay careful attention to the way you tee up a conversation. Remind them, this is the objective we're after. This is the timeline we talked about. Here's who is involved, because they probably forgot. You can minimize the way that they change their mind. There's all types of little tricks that as an individual contributor, you can employ to have a better relationship and ultimately improve your boss.
Okay, I love these and I want more. Those are great. So let me summarize what you just said. So if you have a controlling kind of jerk, a micromanager of a jerk boss, or just let's stop using jerk boss, a micromanager. And the way that you can have a little bit more control is to ask for a standing meeting. Does it have to be every day or can it be every week? Or I love that advice.
You're going to flex a little bit based on what your manager is showing you. If they're blowing up your phone every hour, we're going to stretch them to a lunch meeting and an end of day meeting. If they're in your inbox every day and you'd prefer to stretch it out longer, maybe a Monday huddle and a Thursday huddle. You want to subtly stretch that amount of time that they are leaving you to do your work out, but you don't want to do too much too fast, because micromanagers, they generally come from a good place. Maybe they had a team that let them down and that's why they're a micromanager. Maybe their boss is a micromanager and that's just cascading down to you. You don't want to assume too much. You want to gently start to stretch the amount of time that you have to do your actual work instead of updating them.
Oh, I love that. Okay. And then the second example that you gave us, which was great, is the manager, the leader who's switching, changing their mind all the time. And so remind them what they can do with that type of manager.
If you have a leader who always changes their mind, you give them what I call a tee up. Before you ask for their opinion on something, before you give them an update, you are going to recap the context because they're going in a million different directions. You're going to say, here's what we talked about last time. The objective with this project is this. Here's the timeline we discussed. Here's who's involved. It doesn't have to be lengthy, just a few sentences to bring their mind into the conversation. And again, this is probably a well-intended leader. They probably have a lot of creative ideas. They're probably really passionate, and you can reap the benefits of those qualities without paying the constant change your mind price by giving that level of tee up, of foundation setting for them to engage effectively.
I love it. What about, I hear this a lot, and I know you do too, Lisa, a lot of leaders who are just not great at communicating. And so their employees don't know where they stand. They send a text and the leader doesn't text back. They send an email. The leader doesn't send back an email. They have a one-on-one. The leader cancels. And the leader's so oblivious. They don't know that the employee is just assuming the worst. Like, okay, right. Wow, am I about to get fired? Like, I'm not getting much. What can we do? How can we lead ourselves to handle a leader who doesn't communicate well?
So we've gone in this conversation from the big esoteric purpose and how we're helping people go home at night on time to what do I do with these micro behaviors with my leader? And the dots are all connected. So the first thing that you can do as an employee, if you're getting that, and I could tell leaders, answer your employees' text, don't cancel. I could lecture on all that. But the first thing you can do as an employee, if you're getting this behavior, is when you talk to your manager, try and connect on what's the purpose of our work and why does this matter to you? Now, why am I telling you to do that? Because that's going to enable you, the employee, to give them credit for good intent. Because what's happening is you're reading everything in the absence of the leader telling you their intent. We're going to read it in the negative, especially we're sitting at home at our kitchen table. We're getting these cancellations on the one-on-ones. And Elizabeth has some really, in leading yourself, there are some really practical techniques on what to do when your leader cancels the one-on-one. But the first thing you want to do is get shared intent. You said people don't put up with jerk bosses like Steve Jobs anymore. They may not, but he laid the foundation for us around shared purpose. So first thing you want to do is that. But if you're getting these things from your leader, one of the things you can do is be honest. Is be absolutely honest and say, it might not mean a lot to you, but our one-on-ones mean a lot to me. And when you cancel at the last minute, I got to be honest with you, my brain goes to the worst places. Now they know. People don't know. My mother was a school teacher, and she used to say early on, you may not be able to change a kid who's really bad, and she was a high school teacher, so by that time they were really bad. She said, you may not be able to change them, but you can change the way they treat you.
Beautiful.
And when you say that to your boss, first of all, connect. Why do you work here? Why does this matter to you? Hopefully you'll get something because your boss isn't skilled in this language. If he's my age, he's definitely not skilled in this language because we didn't come up that way. But then the next thing you can say, and she's got some language about it in the book, is be honest. You know, when our one-on-ones get canceled, I've spent a lot of time preparing for them, and my brain goes to the worst.
I love that. And the power of language, I'm exploring that. I'm exploring the power of environment, the power of language, the power of owning your energy. So Elizabeth, if you can give us any more of these specific tips like you did for the micromanager, for the leader who changes all the time, for the leader who doesn't communicate. And thank you for that, Lisa. I'd love to hear more.
Well, I'll give you a tip that can apply to frustrating bosses and frustrating colleagues. There is a phenomenon that happens, especially in the virtual world, where an unresponse is really accepted. In a face-to-face interaction, for you to not answer my question would be so socially weird. But for people to not answer an email, totally normal. So if you're experiencing a boss or a colleague who's ghosting you, they're not answering your emails, they're not giving you the data you need, the information you need, whatever it is, and it's holding you up, you want to dial up the urgency. And the way you do that ties exactly back to what Lisa was saying. You articulate why this matters and what's at stake, because everything comes to us, particularly in a virtual environment, the same. Your email is in the same inbox as my DoorDash confirmation, which is in the same inbox as my boss needing an urgent report. And it's really difficult to prioritize. But as an individual contributor, the more you can amp up the urgency, here's what's at stake with this. Here's why it matters. Here's what happens if we don't do it, the more likely you are to get a response. And on the one hand, you may be sitting there thinking, well, I shouldn't have to do that. They should know why it matters, or they should just give me what I need because we work together. Unfortunately, you do have to do this, but the more you can generate urgency, the more likely you are to get what you need and have that purpose-driven work experience instead of following up until the end of time.
Love that. And how about language? Talk to us about the power of language. Which words should we use and which words should we avoid?
I would say avoid no worries if you are in fact worried. Avoid just following up, this language that minimizes in really subtle ways the importance of our work. Lean into that impact-driven language of when we do this, the impact we're making, the purpose of our work. You will change your own heart and you will change the hearts of the annoying people around you the more you do it.
So did you hear that, listeners? That's great advice. How often each day do we get an email or a text that says, no worries? That is minimizing. Just following up. That is minimizing. So what Lisa and Elizabeth are telling us is that we have so much more power than we realize. Again, doesn't matter your title and organization. We as individuals, we need to recognize our power, recognize we have control, and we need to lead ourselves more. Make sure that we find purpose, right? And that we are in control of asking for what we want, scheduling those meetings, framing the message, framing the why, making sure that you're setting up the urgency when needed. I absolutely love all of this advice. And this has been a great seismic shift conversation again for me, because it gives everybody an opportunity to feel better each day that they do have control. And so if you could just summarize, that would be great. Elizabeth, I've loved this conversation. Just summarize for the listeners what they can start doing tomorrow to find more, because I began this episode talking about the what if you could wake up with more energy, better relationship with your boss. So give them, an idea of what they can do starting tomorrow so they can find, what did you say the subtitle? So they can find more joy, more meaning, and more opportunities in the job you already have.
Instead of stewing about all of the things that are out of your control, which is easy to do because there are probably a lot, focus on the things that are within your control. And sometimes that's your own mindset. If you are experiencing frustration at work, the power is in your hands to change it.
Oh, that is so beautiful. And Lisa, what would you like your closing words to be for our listeners?
Read the book. I read the book after she wrote it. And the reason I say that is we can intellectually say the power is in your hands, the power is in your mindset, but we already know that. The day-to-day is what weighs us down. And so one of the things that I love about leading yourself is it offers practical tips so that if you're not all the way there yet, you can act as if.
That's what I love the most about this book. And Lisa said Elizabeth said in the very beginning, why I wrote this book. I've read a ton of business books in my last decade of consulting. The vast majority of them fail to make any lasting impact for two reasons. They're aimed at the C-suite and they're frighteningly abstract. And one of the beautiful things about this book is it does offer concrete tips and strategies that you can employ tomorrow to gain more control so that you don't end up as that miserable person who might be in the same exact position in the same type of company working for the same type of boss as the person who has passion and who has found meaning and joy in their lives. And we want to be that person. So thank you again, Elizabeth. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us on the Seismic Shift podcast. You all have really been enlightening and you've added such clarity and you've given us a sense of control and some practical tips that we can start applying tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on the Seismic Shift. And before you go, can I ask one favor of you? Do you mind sharing today's episode with a leader you know? The power of this conversation is found in your using it and sharing it to create real connection in your life. Lastly, I'd like to thank Loyola University New Orleans and the Terra Firma audio team for helping bring this content to life.